Today we are mixing metals. So with silver, we're not having that problem. With brass, we do. That is the trickiest part, to solder that brass and silver together. And here you can see I had a sliding with two details and they solder together. It's the easiest way how you can shape it and actually control all of the hammering. Hello guys, and welcome back to my channel. Today we are mixing metals, which is one of my favorite styles to create in jewelry. It takes a lot of patience, that's why I'm not digging all the time in it, but I do love how pieces are looking like. You can create very cool patterns out of just mixing brass with your silver. Throughout the years, I did that a lot. I have quite a lot of practice when it comes to working with brass and silver. It's not easy. I will give you all of my tips that I have now, because soldering becomes very tricky when we play with brass and silver together. It's not just brass we need to solder, we need to combine silver with brass. That is the trickiest part, to solder that brass and silver together. They're very different metals to work with, so you do need to understand the specific of the metal and how to work with it. That gold color, we do love a good gold color, and I do love that yellow gold color that we have with the brass. I'm very picky when it comes to gold color. I am. And when it comes to brass, it just gives exactly what I want to see in my gold color. It just looks more luxury, more expensive, like sophisticated too. Like, I do love how it looks like. Then we're shaping the hoop, you know, all the good stuff when it comes to jewelry making. You know, hoops are, I don't want to say it's my favorite jewelry piece to make, but one of my favorites for sure. The same hoop I showed before on my channel, just we're making that a bit bigger. And yeah, I think we have to start this. First of all, we're deciding what kind of print we will be putting on our silver hoops. I chose a cow print. My grandparents had a farm. We had a lot of cows when I was growing up, so I love cow print. That's why I chose a cow print. You can choose whatever you want. I'm just giving you advice how to make that happen. This time I chose to cut small details with the laser. It keeps me accurate. It's a very cool tool to have, especially if we can cut it. We have 0.3 millimeter thickness of the brass, and we have 0.5 millimeter thickness of the silver. Why we need different thickness of the metal, I will explain later on. And I would want to add that the laser for cutting we could use just if it's that thickness. With silver, I am stopping at 0.5 millimeter thickness because it takes too long if it's thicker. So when you want to cut small details for your work, which is pretty flat, it's very convenient tool to have. Now we're taking our details out of the sheets and we need to cut shape for the hoops. I'm cutting that from 0.5 millimeter thickness of silver because we will be hammering that. If we wouldn't be hammering, it wouldn't be enough to have 0.5. 0.5 is thin. We couldn't create shapes out of that. That's why I love hammering so much, because you can actually create volume, you know, bigger pieces from way smaller amount of metal, especially now when silver is like high in the price. But we always try to save metal. Now we're filing and sanding our shape, that it would be clean, that we would have beautiful edges, more around it. It's easier to navigate the shape when you have structured shape more. That's why I always start a bit with edgier shape, then I'm removing that with sanding because it keeps me accurate. Here I'm sanding the shape on the flat surface, which is my bench bag, and I'm putting wet and dry paper to have it that way. But while I was doing that, lines are not going with the same row. You know how I am about directions while sanding, so I corrected that with a sponge. The main shape, flat surface, because sponge could remove more in certain areas. You don't want to push sponge that much. We're just correcting our sanding lines in this case. Okay, now we are starting to solder. And I'm happy to announce that this video is sponsored by GRANDE, which is a big jewelry supply store where I'm buying lots of different things for my jewelry making. From tools, silver, supplies, they really do have everything you might need for your jewelry creations. And they're giving you a code with $20 off of your shipping price. The code is working again, so use it while we have it. Thank you, Rio Grande, for sponsoring this video. With solder, it's always about preparation, as I always tell you. So all of those small pieces or whatever pattern you're soldering on your piece, you have to prepare with a solder itself. This technique calls sweat soldering. So you're placing your solder chips on each detail, and you want to melt it on the detail that it would cover all of the surface. The name explains itself because when you will have that solder under your detail and you will place that on your piece you want to solder that detail on, you will heat up the piece, it will get wet, so it's like sweaty, and that solder would melt where that detail exactly is. That's the most correct technique how you would want to solder any detail on your piece. Not always we do that, but we should if we want very beautiful joint, very detailed soldering, less sanding later on. So you count your time here. In this case, to solder brass without sweat soldering, I wouldn't recommend for anyone because it's hard. Brass itself is very nasty metal to work with. It takes practice to understand what's happening with that metal in general when you're heating that up. That's why we have thinner brass sheet here and we have thicker silver sheet. From lots of practice to fail in working with brass and soldering that on the silver itself, I can tell you that's the best choice that you can make, just to take thinner brass and combine it with silver. Because brass needs way more heat to heat up and to actually melt that solder. It's not just because of the thickness, it's just because brass is getting oxidized very quickly and a lot, while silver itself, it's behaving way better and just melting that solder where you want that solder would go. And even how the solder is going and melting. With silver, you will have way cleaner melting. With the brass, it will be like blobs sometimes. That's why when you're working with brass and details, you will have multiple soldering. You won't solder details in one go, especially when we have a lot of them. We want that solder would go around the detail, not just melt in one place. So with silver, we're not having that problem. With brass, we do. We just come back and resolder that again. And when you come back, usually second or third soldering will go way quicker and smoother than the first one went. If you will heat up your back plate a lot, silver might take the brass in. Sometimes it happens. And here you can see I had a sliding with two details and they solder together. Sliding happens when you have too much of solder or the surface of your back plate starting to melt. In this case, I had too much of solder. If you want very correct soldering, I haven't finished my sweat soldering technique. Life is busy. I skipped steps too, and yeah, we had too much of solder there. That's why we have that slippage. With sweat soldering, you should sand each of detail after you put solder on, that you would have the same equal amount on details and you could have very polished, beautiful soldering. But most of the times I skip that step because I feel that solder amount usually. Maybe just one detail just, failed me. Alright, now we are finally making those hoops happen. We're finally hammering the shape. I have a video how I'm shaping these hoops. These ones are a bit bigger, I would say. Technique is the same. I'm making a dip with my 14mm hammerhead into a wooden block and then hammer my earrings from the sheet to the curve. Hammering always takes lots of annealing because when you're shaping, your piece gets harder and harder. So all molecules are just like hugging each other and nobody wants to move anymore. So we want to heat them up to make it loose and then we can shape it again. For me, I anneal these maybe 3 or 4 times to make it happen. For you, maybe you have to anneal more. It depends on the practice. The main key with hammering, you have to stay and hammer in one place and move with the piece you want to hammer. It's the easiest way how you can shape it and actually control all of the hammering. I'm making the main shape on the wooden block and then I'm correcting the edges and shape on doming tools. It's a process. The more you will practice, the quicker you will shape your things. When I started, maybe it took me 2 hours. Now I can do the same in half an hour. So you get that improvement for sure. Just keep on doing, you know, just keep on doing. Maybe on a good day I could do that in 15 minutes. I don't know. I should do a gamble or something. Finally, we have our hoop ready. We're just correcting the edges with this sanding barrel. It's stable. I like to use it in places like this because we have stable edge. We don't want to take some metal out of something, so you want stable sanding tool in this part. And we need to solder our earring post, so we need to create the space for it. I like to bend my metal. Then we have very stable holding with that earring post. I have a video how to solder earring post correctly. I will link it here. Now is the time for sanding. Not my favorite part, as you all know, but we have to do it. This part was pretty nice because we can actually reveal how it looks like. That gold color is finally peeking through and it looks stunning. You have to trust the process when you're making something like this, especially when you're working with the brass, because brass gets very dirty. Oxidation is very high. Discoloration is a lot with brass. For this part, I'm using stable barrel to sand because I want to remove surface in certain areas. We do have a lot of fire scale here, even with silver, because we need to heat that piece a lot. So we need to remove that layer off. You could use even more precise, but it was on the hand and I just took it and did all the job. The main point is not to break the shape because we still want to see that print and that pattern on our hoops. So we're removing just areas where we need to remove them. And then I'm going with the big wheel, but very feathery touch. Use your hands just to hold it, but very lightly touch the surface. Then we can correct our directions with sanding lines. And then I'm coming with smaller wheels to polish that out to have a beautiful, beautiful finish and put everything in a tumbler just to make it even more shiny. And voila, we have a beautiful silver hoops. Okay, so we are done with this piece. I hope you found it useful and I hope that gave you understanding how that brass with silver works together, how to solder it together. I'm just giving you my tips and I hope you will try to mix metals as well because it does look cool. When you challenge yourself more and more, working just with one metal becomes way easier. I can tell you that. And when you're training yourself with challenging pieces, it truly gives you a better understanding how that soldering works, how much time you actually have to spend while you're soldering your pieces as well. Because when you see that melting, it doesn't mean that you solder good. It doesn't mean that we have very beautiful seam inside as well, because outside could be looking quite good, but inside is cracked or something. These things you will get know better, when you would do those challenging pieces more. That's why we need to play around with different styles of jewelry. I do love to make different styles of jewelry, you know me, like I love dainty, extra dainty, I love big, bold pieces as well. So when it comes to that, my soldering experience is quite wide, I would say. You know, even though I'm working 6 years, maybe someone else is working 20 years in soldering, but if you're sticking with the same style of jewelry, how can you tell that you're very good at soldering pieces? Because now I'm very sure with my soldering. I was struggling with it so many years. Whatever piece I would have in my head, I will solder it. I don't have even question that I wouldn't solder that. For me, it's more like how to prepare the thing for soldering. But when I'm in the soldering station, I'm like, you know, I know what I'm doing. So I would love to give you that understanding as well. But you can be sure about it when you actually do a lot in different things. Not just stick around with one style of jewelry. It teaches you quite around, you know, like all of the subject, not just like specific one subject, maybe very detailed pieces. But if the person is good with detailed pieces, it doesn't mean that that person will be good with bold, bigger pieces. If you haven't soldered that one, you won't solder that one good. I'm very sure about it. So yeah, if you have questions or your suggestions how to work and mix metals together, maybe you have a very good tip how to work with brass as well, let us know in the comments for sure. I'm teaching myself through comments as well. As always, I love when you give your tips and we can discuss, and from our discussion some people could read it and have more information about it, which is very useful for everybody. So I hope you have some great tips as well. And yeah, let me know what you would want to see on this channel, and I hope you liked it. And I will see you in my next one.